You know exactly why we love football, right? It's because it's beautifully, totally unpredictable. We scream at the television, we cry in the stands, and we absolutely lose our minds celebrating those dramatic last-minute winners. And we do that because we believe, heart and soul, that we're watching pure, unscripted human drama. But what if the script was already written? And I don't mean by some genius manager or a legendary playmaker. I mean by a transnational criminal syndicate sitting in an anonymous hotel room thousands of miles away. Because for decades, soccer has harbored a pretty dark underbelly. In this explainer, we're diving into how international mafias, illegal gambling rings, and even some high-ranking executives have essentially treated the beautiful game as their own personal, multi-billion-dollar casino. So, we really have to ask ourselves, is the beautiful game truly unscripted? Because behind the bright floodlights and the roaring crowds, match fixing isn't just some urban myth or a gritty movie plot. It's a highly structured, completely borderless corporate industry. And getting a handle on how it actually works is the first step to seeing the game in a totally new light. Now, match fixing isn't exactly a new phenomenon, but the scale of it, that has evolved drastically. It went from localized corruption right into a massive corporate machine. Think back to 2006. The Calciopoli scandal absolutely shook Italian football to its core, revealing that top club managers were literally hand-picking referees to manipulate domestic games. That proved corruption could thrive at the absolute summit of European football. But the real game changer? That happened a few years later, shifting from Europe to Asia. Syndicates led by notorious figures like Wilson Raj Permal out of Singapore had a major realization. They figured out they didn't actually need to manipulate top-tier matches, the ones with 100 cameras pointing at the pitch, to make millions. Instead, they targeted international friendlies, youth tournaments, and financially vulnerable players. They eventually started buying up entire football associations just to organize completely meaningless matches, all to manipulate betting lines on unregulated Asian markets. To put that into perspective, by the time law enforcement finally woke up to the Bochum investigation in Germany, authorities discovered a truly terrifying metric. A single syndicate had successfully manipulated over 200 matches across dozens of countries. And we aren't just talking about matches played in the local park. We are talking about Champions League and Europa League qualifiers. This wasn't just a few bad apples. This was a well-oiled multinational machine executing fraud on a literal industrial scale. To really understand the nuts and bolts of how they pull this off, we have to look at the groundbreaking work of investigative journalist Declan Hill. In his definitive book, The Fix, and his peer-reviewed research, he digs deep into what he calls a critical mass of corruption. Hill actually embedded himself within these Asian betting syndicates to map out their operations firsthand. His research brilliantly highlights how these syndicates completely shifted their targets away from high-profile leagues, focusing instead on financially vulnerable lower-tier players and entire associations. They specifically look for the weak points in the armor. Situations where a severely delayed paycheck makes a player incredibly susceptible to taking a bribe. If we compare that historical era, say pre-2015, to the present day, it's honestly like looking at two completely different industries. Back in the day, the mafia targeted top-tier matches, trying to alter the final win, loss, or draw using your standard physical bookmakers. But today, it's all about the lower tiers, youth divisions, and women's soccer. And instead of focusing on final scores, they use something called spot fixing, which we'll definitely get into in a second. Plus, the money is now moving through completely unregulated Asian gambling markets and decentralized crypto platforms. The criminals just got smarter, and they went totally underground. But hey, while the criminal syndicates were busy corrupting the pitch from the bottom up, what was happening with the institutions meant to protect the sport? Well, many were rotting from the top down. The absolute explosion of the FIFA Gate scandal in 2015 violently pulled back the curtain on decades of alleged systemic bribery, wire fraud, and money laundering. It all kicked off with those dramatic early-morning police raids at a luxury Swiss hotel. That moment exposed what many claimed was deep institutional rot, specifically tied to World Cup hosting rights and those incredibly lucrative broadcast contracts. So what actually happened to these high-profile executives after years and years of sensational headlines? While the legal aftermath is pretty complex, former FIFA president Sepp Blatter and ex-UEFA chief Michel Platini were both recently acquitted, for a second time actually, by Swiss appeals courts over disputed internal payouts. Over in the U.S., a massive federal prosecution against former Fox executive Hernan Lopez for broadcast bribery was completely dismissed after the Supreme Court narrowed the legal definitions of wire fraud. Even current FIFA president Gianni Infantino was officially cleared of criminal wrongdoing by Swiss prosecutors. So the real takeaway here is this. While the old guard's careers were definitely ruined by the scandals, successfully proving systemic corporate corruption under criminal law, that remains a massive uphill battle for global prosecutors. But hold on, that doesn't mean the book is totally closed on institutional scrutiny. While those historical cases have largely wrapped up with a series of pretty quiet legal closures, modern FIFA operations still face active, ongoing oversight today. Case in point, right now, the Attorneys General of New York and New Jersey have issued joint subpoenas regarding ticketing transparency, practices, and allocations for the upcoming 2026 World Cup matches. It just goes to show that as the money and the stakes get higher, local and state authorities are keeping a very, very close eye on the operational infrastructure of the sport. Meanwhile, as those high-profile legal battles sort of fade into history, the betting mafias have adapted, utilizing digital technologies that traditional law enforcement can barely keep up with. I mentioned this earlier, spot fixing. This is exactly how the modern mafia operates. They rarely try to fix the final score of a Premier League match anymore. I mean, top-tier players earn way too much, and there are just too many cameras. Instead, criminal networks approach semi-professional players, youth athletes, or teams facing those severe wage delays we talked about, and they don't even ask them to lose the game. They might literally pay a player a year's salary just to deliberately kick the ball out of bounds for a corner kick in the first 10 minutes, or purposely pick up a yellow card before halftime. It's hyper-specific, it's insanely lucrative on the live betting markets, and it's incredibly difficult to spot with the naked eye. And this isn't just a wild theory, it's heavily, heavily documented. Verified investigative reporting by the Guardian's Sports Integrity Desk, along with fantastic legal breakdowns by Law and Sport, have exposed exactly how these mafias operate today. They actively target severe wage delays in lower-tier European divisions, and they completely manipulate live micro-betting markets. They exploit the fact that modern betting companies offer odds on almost every single tiny action that happens on the pitch, no matter how obscure the league is. And honestly, the manipulation goes to places you wouldn't even believe. Enter the bizarre, almost sci-fi phenomenon of ghost games. To understand this, you need to know that sports data companies hire low-level data scouts to physically sit in stadiums and tap buttons on their phones to relay live match updates back to global betting platforms. Well, syndicates realized they could just bribe these scouts. In some crazy instances, corrupt scouts have completely fabricated entire matches that never actually took place in reality. The betting platforms accepted wagers on a completely fictional game, and the syndicates walked away with massive illicit profits off events constructed entirely out of thin air. Absolutely wild. So you're probably wondering, where is all this money going, and why can't the police just follow it? Well, the digital age provided the perfect camouflage. We are dealing with entirely unregulated online platforms operating out of offshore tax havens. They have absolutely zero customer verification, what the finance world calls KYC, or Know Your Customer Compliance. Add to that the complete anonymity of cryptocurrency transactions, and you have a system literally designed to obscure the financial paper trail. It makes it virtually impossible for traditional local law enforcement to track the flow of dirty money. Thankfully, international law enforcement is finally waking up to the true scale of the problem. Europol's official Operation Vita report was an absolute landmark moment. It formally exposed the staggering, borderless scale of this global match-fixing network, specifically highlighting the massive reach of Asian syndicates right into the European theater. It proved to the world that this wasn't just some local policing issue. It was a transnational organized crime threat that required a completely new playbook to fight. Which brings us to the million-dollar, or I guess multi-billion-dollar question: how do we actually stop this malady before it destroys the very soul of the sport? Because let's face it, if we can't trust what we are watching, the entire emotional investment we have in soccer just collapses. But the good news is, global authorities and tech companies aren't just sitting by. They are mounting a massive, high-tech defense. It's basically a massive three-pronged defense being deployed right now. On the legal side, you have the Macallan Convention, initiated by the Council of Europe. It's become a binding international treaty, literally forcing states to criminalize match fixing and actually share intelligence across borders. Technologically, governing bodies are partnering with companies like Sportradar to monitor global betting in real time using artificial intelligence. And on the ground, you have specialized global task forces like Interpol's match-fixing task force and Europol actively mapping out these syndicates to execute cross-border arrests. Let's geek out on the tech for a second, because how the AI aspect actually works in practice is fascinating. Governing bodies like FIFA and UEFA utilize something called the Universal Fraud Detection System, or UFDS. This is an incredibly advanced algorithmic network that tracks global betting patterns 24 hours a day. If a syndicate tries a spot fix, let's say suddenly wagering a massive, highly irregular amount of money on a yellow card in a random third-tier match, the UFDS detects that anomaly instantly. It triggers an immediate alert, freezes the payouts, and launches an integrity investigation before the match is even over. It is literally a real-time digital shield against fraud. But look, as incredible as that tech is, the war is far from won. As extensive investigations from BBC Panorama have repeatedly exposed, the extreme vulnerabilities of soccer to transnational betting syndicates remain very real. They've documented the operations of fixers like Wilson Raj Perumal to show that as long as billions of dollars continue to flow freely through these unregulated, offshore gambling markets, organized crime is always going to look for the next loophole. They'll look for the next desperate player or the next vulnerable data scout. Which leaves us with this one final, really provocative thought to end on. If the unpredictability is gone, if that last-minute penalty or that shocking red card was actually predetermined by a syndicate half a world away, what are we really watching? Is it a sport? Or is it just a beautifully choreographed illusion? The battle for the integrity of soccer is quite literally a battle for its soul. And the next time you sit down to watch a match, you kind of have to ask yourself, are you watching unscripted human drama, or are you just watching the script play out?
Getting to the heart of the matter isn't always easy, but here we always look for the essence. Thank you for your time and your curiosity. Subscribe for more answers, and as always, thanks for watching.